Now, I have written on the board here, this is you, and this is the little symbol we use for the law. And this represents, in this context right now, the standard that we have for ourselves. In Romans chapter 2, he talks about both the Jewish people having the Mosaic law, which is over them and gives them a standard by which to judge themselves. And he says even Gentiles have their own standard. Though they don't have the Mosaic law, they have their own standard, their own law. And in a lot of translations, that's a lowercase l in that case. But it's the same word in the original language. And it's this idea of a standard, a system of measurements. So think with me for a moment in terms of a person's lifelong pursuit of self-justification or of proving themselves. What are some secular, just everyday standards that people judge themselves by? What would be some examples of some things? Why don't I start for us? How's that? Okay, somebody said success. Good. Now you're going to, don't judge my bad spelling, okay? How about strength? Whether physical strength, mental strength, emotional strength. What would be some other examples of measurements or standards by which we judge ourselves? All right, the shoes you wear, okay? All right, so clothes or style. I don't know, let's say, well, I got a lot of S's up there, and that wasn't on purpose. Let's just say style. I think it's, yikes, how do you spell that? S-T-Y-L-E, there you go, okay. Style. Anything else that comes to mind? Yeah, Lori? Okay, wealth, yeah, okay, so I'm just going to do this. All right, good. Robert? All right, class, which is similar. So a person might evaluate themselves with these types of measurements and try to determine, okay, how well am I doing? Where am I deficient? Where am I improving? Those types of preoccupations. And when Paul talks about the Gentiles having a law basically imprinted on their minds, there's some sense in which it relates to this self-justifying effort, and there are innumerable measurements, really, depending on who you talk to. People can care about all sorts of different things by which they judge themselves or measure themselves. So this person is self-focused, they have their standard, and they're judging themselves, evaluating themselves. And he goes on to say there in Romans 2, let me just look at it so I don't butcher it, but in Romans 2, he says, they have a conscience bearing witness, and their thoughts alternatively or alternately accusing or else defending them. Constant accusations and defenses. Accusations and defenses. That too is related to this self-justifying nature that we have. Okay? Now let's talk for a moment about maybe some religious examples, a religious category. Maybe we can think of even the biblical standards. So what would be some standards by which we evaluate ourselves religiously? Yes, in the back. Okay, church attendance. There you go. I'm going to abbreviate some of these. Okay, Bible reading and let's say Bible knowledge, right? The spiritual disciplines. Sometimes, and we know better, but we do this anyway, don't we? We compare ourselves to other people and say, well, how am I doing in this area of my life, or how much I know versus how much they know, or how faithful I am versus how unfaithful they are with attendance or something like that. There's all sorts of ways that we measure, and it could be totally secular, it could be biblically informed, but the flesh seizes upon the law, whether the lowercase l law of just the standards out there in our world, or the uppercase L law of the biblical law, the biblical standard. Either way, our flesh seizes upon the standards in order to justify itself, to prove itself. For us to feel like we matter, like we're worthy, like we are complete, we are striving for that. And I would suggest that's one of the reasons we have a hard time laughing at ourselves. That's one of the reasons we tend to take ourselves so seriously and can be so uptight. And I think we would all agree that would be an undesirable quality. And I think we would even say, hey, for people who we care about, that would be undesirable. You might, for fun or not fun, depending on how you look at it, you might ask people who know you well, a loved one, a spouse, your children, you might ask them, hey, when you think about me, do you feel like I'm a person who takes myself seriously, or do you feel like I'm a person who can laugh at myself? I mean, if you dare, you might ask. That'd be an interesting exercise for all of us. Maybe I'll do that. Maybe I won't, but I don't know, maybe. So let's think about this now in terms of our view of others. So not only are we this way, but we live in a world filled with people who are also doing the same thing. And they have their standards by which they are living. And when this person is living this way, taking himself very seriously, and this person is living this way, taking himself very seriously, how well do you suppose in a long-term relationship these people are going to get along? Over time, two people who are taking themselves really seriously, really driven, how long do you think they're going to get along? Or do things tend to crop up that then become points of contention? They do, don't they? Because this person's standard by which they're living is likely different than this person's standard by which they're living and what matters to them. Would you agree with that? And so, when James talks about, this is very interesting, conflict, he says that what causes conflict is our desires, and this is fascinating, biblically and even psychologically, there's a lot of evidence of this, but what we do is we have those things that we want, and that goes back to the garden. We have those things that we want, that matter to us, that we value, and that goes back to the garden in the sense of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We have things that are preferable, desirable to us, and we have things that we have an aversion to or an allergy, so to speak, to. Okay? And what James refers to in terms of desire, what he refers to in terms of desire has to do with what really stems from that garden and post-garden reality of going after what we value, what we want. And one of the things that we do is when we go after what we want, we find standards by which to rationalize going after what we want. We attribute value to it, and we even deem it to be right. That's why you can be talking to someone. I mean, think about this. The average police officer pulls someone over, and they're going, let's say, well over the speed limit. Not all the time, but probably often, the person can give a rationalization for why they were going over the speed limit. Hey, I was late for work, or, I'm trying to get home so I can take my kid to practice, or, whatever it is. Guy was riding on my tail. We have ways that we justify and rationalize what we want. It's all part of this justification effort, and we end up colliding with other people who are justifying what they want. The Bible refers to that. In fact, in James 4, when he talks about the source of quarrels and conflicts being our desires, it also later in that context, right there, it talks about judging others. You see the same thing in Romans 1 and 2, where he talks about our desires, our idolatry, and then judging, self-righteously judging others. There's numerous places, even Galatians does the same thing, where it talks about our selfish desires, our lusts, our cravings, and our justification of those desires. And the picture that the New Testament paints is that that is what is the source of conflict, and when you have two lustful people who are justifying their lusts and cravings, they end up colliding and battling over right or righteousness. If you think about every conflict, argument, maybe a little squabble in your house between siblings or two people in a church fighting over something or political battles that go on, every one of them, if you listen carefully, you will hear that the argument really boils down to who's right and who's wrong. It has to do with right. When Jill and I got married, some of the first few arguments, we had some interesting ones. One of them, remember this, Jill? One of them was over the correct way to install the toilet paper when you're putting a new roll of toilet paper on. If it goes this way or this way. Now I know, I have been instructed, and I'm all in on this now. The correct way is that way, and there's a reason for that. Yes, some of our friends, it makes very happy to think about it that going that way. Yes, correct. Well, I was persuaded. I was an ignoramus in the beginning, but I have now been schooled in the proper toilet paper installation, and I know how it goes. But we joke about it, but it has to do with, hey, what's the right way to do it? And there's a right way to load the dishwasher, right? Everybody? And there's a right way to use your money, and how much you should use or not use. And that's all according to your standard of what is right. And your desires are tied to that. And when you're a self-justifying person who's going after what he wants, and then you run into another self-justifying person going after what they want, explosion takes place. Collision happens. Has everything to do with righteousness. We don't think of it that way, usually. We usually don't think of it in terms of the biblical doctrine of justification by faith in Jesus, but it has everything to do with that. Two people taking themselves and their desires very seriously. We all live in this world in which there's perpetual judgment, that idea of accusing and defending. This is why we're so oppositional and defensive when people come at us. It's all related to the same fundamental matter of justification. I saw a meme earlier today, picture of a German shepherd, which you know are near and dear to my heart. And it says, "A dog will never lie, never judge, and never betray you." That's why trusting a dog feels a whole lot safer than trusting people. Dog here. Well, there's something to that problem with self-righteousness. Okay, so let's think about Romans some more, all right? So in Romans, Paul talks from the beginning, chapters 1, 2, 3, he develops in great detail the concept of human unrighteousness, which is the opposite of righteousness, obviously, unrighteousness, and it's also the opposite of, or it indicates why we need justification, why we need to be declared righteous, all right? So Paul, and you'll remember this, some of you who have been with us, and if not, you can look at the videos online, but we went into great detail from chapter 1 on about the essence of unrighteousness, and it relates to how we view and value, and should say fail to value our Creator. We fail to value Him. Sometimes we think of it only in terms of, well, there's right things and wrong things, and we do the wrong things, and yes, that's a part of it, but underneath it all, Paul describes unrighteousness as, first of all, failing to relate rightly to our Creator. We don't attribute the worth to Him that He deserves to have attributed to Him. We are not thankful for what He's given us, or not thankful as much as He deserves to be thanked for what He's given us. We don't honor Him with the honor and the glory that He deserves. We exchange the truth of God for a lie, it says, and we worship and serve the creature more than the Creator who is blessed forever. In fact, all these desires that bring us into conflict are part of us clinging to this world, the stuff of it. And Paul says that's because we're idolaters. We value more the things God made than God himself. It's true of us. This is unrighteousness, defined and described by Paul, and he goes on to talk about all the different manifestations of unrighteousness in our lives where we wreak havoc relationally, vertically, and horizontally. And then from there he goes into chapter 2 and some of the things we looked at earlier with regard to this constant battle and judging and being judged, and that is the fray in which we live. And if you're paying attention at all to your own thoughts and to other people and things they say and watching, whether social media or the news or just watching the political arguments that go on, you are seeing this play out all the time. A bunch of self-justifying people in this world colliding with one another. That's the world we live in. And Paul gives us what I would say is the best diagnosis and explanation of it in Romans chapter 1, and then on in 2, and in chapter 3. Later in chapter 3, and you can turn to chapter 3, verse 21, this is where Paul turns the corner, okay, from human unrighteousness and all its manifestations to the gospel, the good news of God granting us the gift of righteousness. So look at verse 21, and we'll just go just a little ways here. But it says, "But now, apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been manifested, being witnessed by the law and the prophets, even the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all those who believe, for there is no distinction. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, being justified as a gift by his grace through the redemption which is in Christ Jesus." So stop there. He says justification, our being declared righteous, in right standing, in right relationship with our Creator, that takes place through Jesus, through another. Jesus and what he has accomplished for us. The basis of our righteousness is not our own life. It's not our own track record. It is Christ's life lived for us. We began with that verse in chapter 5 where it says, "Through one man, many are made righteous." Through his, and it says obedience, and that word is that same word, Pastor Rob and I have talked about it quite a bit, listening under, through his submissive listening to his Father and doing everything that his Father instructed him to do, including laying his life down, serving at every moment, dying for us on the cross, all of that is the way by which we can be assured that we are righteous. Now, this is really important because what it's saying is this. I'm going to just draw another little picture up here. So if you can kind of separate this little picture from this bigger picture just for a moment. Here's a person moving forward in their life, and they're awaiting the day of judgment, okay, when we all stand before God. Judgment day is coming. Oftentimes, for religious people, even in our circles, we can have this view that, well, I've come to Jesus, I believe in him, so it's kind of cleared my record and my sins are forgiven, but my life and my track record and how I fare on that final day still has something to do with how well I do, how well I keep the rules, how I engage in practical righteousness of some kind. We have a hard time believing that over us, and this is Jesus, okay, we have this perfect record of, and guys who are in my Roman study, this will look familiar. We've talked about this from the John O. Linebaugh lectures we've been watching, but we have this record of perfect righteousness, so that the Christian life begins with 100% righteousness because it's His granted to us, and it ends with what percentage? 100%. We are righteous, justified, in right relationship with God by virtue of Christ's life lived for us, by virtue of His obedience, not ours. Our lives are up and down and all over the place as we're going along to that final day. But we live with this record on our account, don't we? I'm going to read to you a few quotes from Professor Linebaugh. We've been watching some lectures that were from my favorite, one of my favorite seminary classes I've had on Romans, and a couple things he said. Just listen. He said, "You both begin and end the Christian life 100% righteous. Our typical notions of what it means to grow as a Christian, of what it means to be transformed, of what it means to get better, which are all phrases which could be fine, have to be reconceived in such a way that it never changes who we are in the eyes of God. We start and end our lives 100% righteous." That matters in so many ways. That's one of the main issues when the Reformation took place. One of the crux debates was related to justification. There are many who believe, many even who would call themselves Christian, who believe, well, when you believe, you come to believe in Jesus, you're given a boost. There's forgiveness for maybe your past track record. But as you go forward, God has this renovation project going on in which you're more and more justified by your own contributions, or you contribute something and God infuses grace to you so that hopefully by the end you have enough to get an innocent verdict. Hopefully you have enough to be acceptable to God. In fact, in lectures, the professor talked about, this is interesting, in some traditions, they would even wait to baptize people to the end of their lives, just to give them that little boost at the end, that little extra amount of cleansing in hopes that perhaps that would help them. That's not what Paul is talking about. Paul is saying you are justified by the life of another given to you. And now you're invited to live by faith in Jesus, in His righteousness. So he goes on to say, our lives are they never have been and never will be the basis of our righteousness. But the life of Jesus was, is, and will be the basis of our righteousness. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so this does not change. And this is the free space in which we are invited to live our lives, under the banner of Jesus' perfect righteousness on our behalf. His perfect purity, His perfect love, His perfect service. When He said on the cross, "It is finished," not only is it the cleansing of all of our sins, past, present, and future, it is the imputation granting to us this record of His perfection, so that we live our life. And in our experience, do we always experience the reality of this in terms of our thinking and our attitudes? No, we'd be lying if we said that we did. Is it nevertheless true? Yes. That's great news. And one of the things that does, one of many, is it helps us see this game that we're playing in self-justification. It helps us take ourselves a little less seriously. And that's good for us and for everybody around us, right? Everybody around us? It helps us recognize what is happening in conflict with other people. It helps us see the seductive nature of our desires and our tendency to justify those desires. Like a lawyer constantly advocating for ourselves and our agenda, constantly either accusing or defending, never ending, exhausting. The gospel is the remedy for us. It takes the pressure off, frees us to see our own real imperfections and failures and sins. It frees us to bathe in the finished purification work of Christ. Not that we would take lightly somehow how we treat other people. No. God exhorts us to view others, to love others as we've been loved. It absolutely transforms. It radically transforms how we view other people. But that itself is not the basis of our standing before God in any way, and you better be grateful that it is not. The basis is Christ and His perfection. Christ and Him living, dying, rising for you. That's the basis. So it frees us. It frees us in our own view of ourselves. Maybe we can lighten up a little bit about our own flaws and warts and even the times when we make mistakes and stumble and struggle. It frees us in our view of others. Maybe we can lighten up on them, realizing they're not unlike us. The healthiest people are those who can laugh at themselves within their own minds, in their own self-evaluation, and in relationship with others. So, with that, I will close in prayer.